Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar. I'm Kate Godfrey. I'm the Deputy Director for Workplace Experience and the Smarter Working Programme Director at the Government Property Agency. And it's fantastic to have you all on today's webinar. Together with my colleague Anne Burt, we're going to be your hosts for the next 45 minutes. Across to you, Anne.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Kate. And it's an absolute pleasure to be with you all this morning. And I am absolutely delighted to say this is our very first event of Smarter Working Live 2023. So an extra special thank you for choosing to be with us this morning. Over the next month, we've got an enormous banquet of treats awaiting you. 10 days of these bite-sized webinars, followed by our conference day on the 1st of March. So you can head over to smarterworkinglive.com to find out more and to sign up. All of our events are free and they're open to anyone in the public sector who's interested in smarter working. So please do help us spread the word. We'd love as many of you and your colleagues to join us as possible. So on to today's theme, and it's one that is really, really important for us at the Government Property Agency. In fact, it is so important that we created a new category for it in our Smarter Working Live Awards this year, Future Focused and Sustainable Property. This is all about making the right choices about our estate for the long term, about playing our part in how we reach net zero, and looking at how we work with our partners, our suppliers, and our clients to embed sustainability in everything that we do. And we've got 4 panellists who are going to join us today to explore this topic. I will introduce them in a moment, but I'll just hand back to Kate to talk to you about how you can get involved in this session.
Brilliant, thanks, Anne. So hopefully some of you have already found, and we've seen some comments already posted, but it's a great opportunity really for you, as Anne said, to get involved, ask your questions, anything that you really want to know about, any challenges that you're facing within your own organisation. And to hear from the panel, their advice, what they would do, bring in some of their best practice. So there is a comment section. Please drop any questions in that comment section, and we'll try to get through those. The plan for the session is I'll hand back to Anne in a minute, who will ask questions to our panel. That will probably take around about 25 minutes. And then depending on how long we've got left, we'll then come to your questions. So, please do get involved. I'll hand back to Anne for the start of the questions.
Thank you so much, Kate. So it's an absolute pleasure to invite our 4 panellists to come and join me on the stage this morning. And we've got 4 GPA colleagues, so I feel quite at home, but they have a wealth of experience between them and they work really a lot across the whole of the public sector looking at these topics. So first we have Clive Anderson, who's GPA's Director of Capital Projects. So he's overseeing our strategic investments in our government hub buildings, but he's also got another hat today. He's the chair of our Sustainability Committee. So he has got a personal interest in this topic as well. Next, we've got LeRoux, who is the programme manager for our net zero programme here at the GPA, looking at how we can reduce our use of carbon in our buildings to meet those government commitments. Our third panellist this morning is Louisa, who's our sustainability manager here at GPA. So she works alongside our clients to embed sustainable practices into our workplaces and does that along with a lot of our facilities management partners. And then the final part of our wonderful panel this morning is Dr. Miguel Godfrey, who's our head of sustainability. So really looking at that strategic overall direction for sustainability and making sure that that's embedded through everything we do in GPA. So a huge welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And as I said, this is a new category for us in GPA in the Smarter Working Awards, thinking about sustainability, but it's something that's become much higher up the agenda over the last few years. So Clive, if I can start with you, thinking about GPA's vision for this area, how is GPA responding to the demands of the greening government commitments?
Anne, thank you, and thanks to Kate as well for those wonderful introductions. So probably worth saying that the Government Property Agency has sort of 4 key objectives. The first of those is to encourage growth across the UK. Secondly, it's driving civil service transformation, also efficiency and value, but also on the final point, delivering against our net zero carbon objectives. But actually government greening commitments, which are set between 21 and 25, extend a long way before simply net zero carbon. There are actually 7 areas to focus on. And they've strengthened a lot of targets, which include emissions in terms of carbon and water, but also waste and green travel planning, particularly reduction on domestic flights. But importantly, there's also new measures across areas such as biodiversity, climate adaptation, and food waste. So any organisation shouldn't really just be considering its emissions. It should look more broadly across that wider sustainability agenda. And we'll talk about the GPA's focused net zero carbon targets, I'm sure, during the course of our discussions. But I just thought I'd say that you mentioned I'm also the chair of the GPA's Sustainability Committee. And just to give colleagues a view of the kind of initiatives that we're looking at. So first of all, we're setting up quite a significant range of sustainability reporting that will link into our annual report and accounts, and also our business plan. We're developing a new EMS, environmental management system, in accordance with 14001. And we're also in the process of developing our ESG policy. So more broadly looking at all of those corporate responsibilities. In light of those requirements to look at biodiversity and climate change adaptation, we're also expanding the GPA's design guide. So we already have a quite significant sustainability annex, and that's going to be expanded. And we've been working with colleagues across government in DEFRA and elsewhere in developing our new biodiversity guide. Then I suppose the final thing I wanted to talk about is the red lines that we've established. So in the delivery of our new projects, we've set red lines around BREEAM Excellent, and we're about to start looking at neighbours as a new criterion for the way that we develop and deliver our projects, both in terms of new build and refurbishment. We're approaching Better Buildings Partnership to support their initiatives. And then probably underpinning all of that, we are investing significantly in training for all of our people. So Miguel and one of his colleagues, Richard Wilson, and Melanie are leading a program of training which is linked into IEMA to give most of our staff a common grounding in their responsibilities and whatever their role is on sustainability. And we're driving forward a gold standard for chartered environmental management within the GPA. So hopefully that gives a review of the kind of investments and initiatives that we're following to focus very much on government greening commitments and those broader requirements on cutting emissions. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you so much, Clive. And I know we will come on to some of those topics during the course of our conversation around kind of how every individual in GPA is being encouraged. If we can move a little bit further out and be a bit more kind of looking out and across the landscape of the public sector estate for a minute. Lou, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And I'm interested to bring in that part that Clive said around net zero and how seriously is GPA taking it. So how is the net zero programme playing its part in GPA's sustainability agenda?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you for having me today, and thanks, Anne. So the GPA Net Zero programme was established back in 2020 and again forms part of our commitment to net zero, as Clive has said, part of our strategic objectives in the GPA. We're fully aware that most of our buildings that are currently in operation today will still be around in 2050. So whilst we develop new build hubs with incredibly strong green standards, it's also important not to forget the existing estate, and that's where the net zero programme really comes into its own. We're responsible for retrofitting low carbon interventions across the government office portfolio, so making them as efficient as possible in terms of energy, but also applying low carbon interventions as well. Over our first full financial year of operation, we delivered over 20,000 upgrades from fluorescent to LED lighting. We've delivered utility savings to date of around 560,000 per annum, and we've also saved over 1,000 tonnes of carbon. For us in the Net Zero programme, it's not just about making these energy efficiency measures across the estate. It's also about doing it in the most efficient way possible. One of our projects down in the south actually utilised a company that offsets their carbon by tree planting. We also, at another site, utilised a very local supplier where we could recycle all of our waste. All of the boxes that the LED lighting came in were recycled, sent back to site for the next batch of LEDs to come across. We completed around 43 projects last year, and our interventions can range from LED lighting upgrades, as mentioned, to upgrades to the heating, ventilation, air conditioning. We're also looking at heat decarbonisation in a number of sites. So whilst that can be incredibly complex, especially having to upgrade electrical infrastructure to sites as well, it's a real commitment to decarbonise our estate where we know we're going to have a long-term retention in those buildings. We've also got a large programme of solar PV installations across the UK, not only helping to reduce carbon emissions, but also to make the sites more energy secure, combining with battery storage as pilots at the moment. We've also got another really complex project at the moment in Whitehall, so looking at our historic estate. The historic estate under net zero and sustainability can always be very, very difficult to reach those quite challenging targets. In the GPA, we're really committed to doing as much as we can to our historic estate. We're looking at a project that's going to look to decarbonise our Whitehall boiler district heating system and potentially using ground source heat pumps. We work really closely with our life cycle replacement programme, so all about doing the right thing at the right time. So making sure we combine it with end of life assets, and when they reach end of life, to do the most carbon efficient upgrades as possible to lower the carbon levels of those buildings as close to net zero as we can get. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Lou. So many different aspects to net zero in there, but I love attention to detail, even looking at the cardboard boxes that the light bulbs come in. So nothing too small in this arena, it feels like. Miguel, I wanted to come to you next, because I think one of the challenges we find in smarter working is kind of persuading people of the case for change, about trying something new. So that seems something that's very similar in the world of sustainability. So from your perspective, why is sustainability important to GPA?
One of the key messages we try to get across in the IEMA training that we're now offering to staff at all levels across GPA is what the challenge is on a global scale for us all on sustainability, and what those key stress factors are and why they're relevant to us, and why we have these international targets. And the UK itself has its own targets, of course, like the net zero by 2050. We, of course, have the responsibility for the government office portfolio, and we are the strategic leaders for sustainability across that portfolio. So we want to be at the leading edge of all work on sustainability, so that we can have a government office portfolio which is sustainable for the future. So we are looking to raise capacity within all of the organisations, so that all of the members of staff know why sustainability is relevant to their work areas, and how they can build sustainability thinking into their decision making. So we have a number of projects across the capital projects and our onboarding, and we are working towards a trajectory towards net zero for the whole government office estate. So it's important that all stages that our new projects are at the leading edge and meeting the best standards that we know that industry can produce. And also, when properties are onboarding to the GPA, not only do they onboard and we understand the condition of them, so the work that the net zero program, they're doing condition surveys to understand what the current functionality of those properties are, but we can work out what gives us the best bang for our buck when we start doing sustainability interventions to those properties to put them on our trajectory towards net zero. We have told people what they need to do in our design guide, and we've also demonstrated in the sustainability annex of the design guide that we understand how you go about making properties more sustainable. And there are clear principles which we have adopted in our net zero program on just the steps you need to go through to actually make that happen. It's all about making the buildings much more efficient, reducing the energy demand, switching where possible to renewable sources, switching over your energy supplies to green tariffs, sweating the asset as much as you can absolutely possibly do. And then the action of last resort is offsetting. But we know that on a national scale, there are all sorts of problems with offsetting. So we are working on what is maximizing what we can do with our asset before we get to that offsetting stage. So because the whole UK economy is moving in this direction. They were looking to people in the public sector as leaders of this, demonstrating that we actually speak our rhetoric and we will deliver against those government targets. So I think it's absolutely important that not only do we move in that direction, but we share the learning from our work and we show everyone that we are committed to it and we will achieve those goals.
Thank you, Miguel. And that's partly, again, why I said why we've brought sustainability into the Smarter Working Awards this year, is because that really gives us a great opportunity to showcase and to celebrate some of those exemplars that absolutely the public sector is leading the way on some of those things. Mel, I'm going to come to you last, and I've got a lovely question for you because you've got your dream world, Mel. So you are in and out of our offices a lot, looking at those day-to-day things that can really make the difference in terms of embedding sustainability into how we do things. So imagine for a moment, describe to me, what's your idea of a perfect sustainable office? What would it look and feel like?
Thanks, Anne. So for me, a sort of dream sustainable office would be an office where it's easy to be sustainable, where it's effortless to just do those right things. So it starts right from how you get to the office, how are you travelling there. I came by bike today, so it's super easy just to come on my bike and use the changing room to get in the office. And then actually using the space as well. If it's set up in the right way, it makes it easy to use sustainably. So if the lights come on and off automatically by motion sensor, if they're already LED lights, so already efficient. If you go to the kitchen and you've already got the recycling bins there that you need and you can easily segregate things, you don't need to think about it too much. Even down to things like when you go to the coffee shop, can you go and take your own mug and get your own coffee refill in there? So all those little things that make it easy throughout the day. And it's sort of sustainability in a wider sense as well. So we've spent a lot of time thinking and talking about things like carbon emissions, waste, how much water we're using. But it's also that wider sense of community and being able to get involved in sustainable activities as well. So in our fairly new hub in Birmingham, Stevenson Street, we have all those different items, but also a community. So our manager there has set up things like charity events that you can get involved in, litter picks, all those kind of activities that kind of make a rounded sense of being involved in a sustainable office. So that's my perfect dream.
Sounds wonderful. And I hope that's it. People can hear some of those bits and think there might be elements of them currently in people's workplaces at the moment. It's trying to draw those all together. As you said, that effortlessness is the really key part, isn't it? So people don't have to think extra or do something more that feels more like a barrier to get into those. Kate, just an opportunity to check in with you here and see how we're doing on the questions from the audience.
Yeah, definitely. So looking a bit low at the moment. So I guess it's just a bit of a push, a bit of a reminder. Please do pop your questions in the comments section. We really love to hear from you. I will just pick up on one very small comment at the moment, though, from Sarah, talking about sort of, Lou, your best practice examples. Are they published anywhere? It would be great to sort of see these showcased.
Yeah, absolutely. I think forums like this are a great opportunity for us to showcase some of the projects that we're working on. We also feed into the GPA's annual reports and accounts. And we also take part in quite a lot of wider industry presentations. So we were recently at the Government Property Conference. We've undertaken presentations at EMEX. We're really keen to share our lessons with wider industry, to actually share some of the lessons we're learning in the complex government office portfolio. We've got such a varied portfolio that actually we are learning a lot on the way, especially in the decarbonisation element. We've also been working with the Workplace Network on their greening playbook, which will be published, I think, in the next couple of months. So all provide us really good opportunities to showcase some of the great work that we're doing under the Net Zero programme. But always welcome new opportunities, and this was one, so thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, Lou. So I'll hand back to Anne just for a few more questions to the panel, but as I said, please do pop your questions in the comments box. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Kate. It feels like we've covered so much already in that 20 minutes since we opened, and I think the value of this is bringing together all these different people who you all kind of cover different aspects of this, and I'd love to hear your different perspectives on some of these. So I think probably the biggest challenge for organisations is often thinking, where do they start? How do they make a start on that? So Clive, I wonder if I could come to you first and think, what do you think the biggest challenges are at the moment for organisations in this area, and what have your experiences from GPA taught you about how they can make that start?
So I think one of the first things to do is make sure that sustainability, rather like health and safety, runs right through the organisation. So it's taken a while for health and safety to be a cultural aspect. I think all organisations see that as a fundamental corporate responsibility. So one of the first things, and it was particularly relevant for what Miguel spoke about there, in making sure that every employee in the organisation understands the reasons why that we're investing to meet those sustainability targets, but also the work that they can do in every part of their role. So a lot of what we're doing within the Government Property Agency is clearly reliant upon our supply chain partners to be able to deliver against those targets. So as Lou talked about on the net zero carbon program, we've got partners with leading consultancies that are providing an awful lot of support to us. We've brought people into the organization. I won't necessarily start advertising the name of those partners, but and they've brought additional capability and capacity into the GPA, particularly on things like our approach on government soft landings, which is another area to be looked at, which is how do we optimize the use of our buildings. So we talked about the creation of new government hubs, which in themselves are they've got very limited carbon footprints, but actually if we don't use those buildings correctly, we won't get the best operational environment. So a lot of work to do. So I think going back to my start point is it needs to be something that's owned by the leadership team, whether that be a board, chief executive, or an executive committee. Needs to be something that's right up there. So I think we made a decision to set up a sustainability committee that would look at all of these areas, and that provides a clear focus on then where we will look to invest. And so colleagues on the line will be aware that a lot of our funding in government comes through Treasury, through our spending review rounds. And so we start the process very early to make sure that we prioritise where we want to invest, whether that be meeting our electronic vehicle charging policy and procedure, focusing and doubling down on net zero carbon. But I just wanted to come out with some quick stats. One of the easiest things to do in making an environment and a work environment smaller, better, and greener is actually to make it smaller. The biggest impact is to actually make the estate smaller. and the challenges around the government central office estate, particularly in Whitehall, is that these are buildings that are historic. We have a legacy responsibility to look after them, so we can't actually dispose of many of those buildings for a number of security and ceremonial reasons. So we have to accept that there are limitations in what we can do. One of Lou's programs is the Whitehall district heating network, which is assisting in taking away carbon emissions on primary heat source. However, just some statistics on what we've been doing in reducing the size of the Whitehall campus. In April 27, we had 84 buildings, and that was costing us £820 million a year to run. Right now, we've reduced that to 42, and that's costing £600 million to run. But by 2030, we'll have reduced the overall Whitehall campus footprint to 17 buildings. 17, and that will cost the taxpayer £390 million a year to run. So we'll have reduced in overall running costs by over 50% the cost of running that estate, which directly relates to the impact on our emissions. So I think, in summary, the key thing is make sure we have commitment at the highest level in the organisation. Make sure that every member of the organisation understands what that means to them, and then thirdly, set targets that actually move you along that reporting structure as quickly as possible. And one of the easiest is actually reduce the size of your estate.
Thank you, Clive. And picking up on your point about targets, I think kind of measuring the impact of some of these things can be a real incentive and a real driver, can't they? When people feel like they're making progress, when they can really demonstrate not just the financial cost, but that wider commitment. But I think that is often a challenge, isn't it? Mel, I think you've got some experience of that around the challenges of gathering data.
Yeah, I think it's one of those challenges you naturally come across in sustainability. It can be either a case of not enough data or sometimes too much data. And there's always that adage that what you measure, you can manage. So it's always good to know what you're doing in terms of energy use, water use, how much waste you're creating. So great to gather all that information. Sometimes it can be a case of just making sure the right level is going to the right people. So you can sometimes get swamped with data on every building and every floor and every piece of equipment. But actually it mainly need to be the kind of the site managers that need to know exactly what's happening in detail in a building. And sometimes if you're looking after a whole portfolio, you just need to have that wider view and understand what each building's using, perhaps on a weekly, monthly or quarterly basis. So we're working hard at the moment to just make sure we're gathering the data we need at the right level and it's going to the right people to be able to make those differences and know what needs to happen and actually what's working well that we can celebrate and sort of see some changes happen as well. So yeah, it's a challenge, but it can have really good outcomes as well.
Thank you, Mel. And picking up on your point about celebrating successes, I think, again, I'm really looking forward to seeing the outcome of the Smarter Working Live Awards category this year. I think there'll be some really fantastic examples in there of work right across the public sector in this area. I wonder if any of you've got any examples that you've noticed recently of organisations you've seen who've really, embraced this and have had some successes in this area that might inspire others listening into this. Lou, I don't know, obviously you've been picking up on some of the stuff around what the civil service is doing, but more widely in the sort of net zero arena, are there any other examples that
there's lots, there's absolutely lots. So Ordnance Survey Explorer House has had significant retrofit at that particular site, including EV charging, PVs. It's a really good example of an absolutely excellent retrofit. I think MOD are also leaders in this field, especially with the installation of PVs across their estate. They've got a very large programme of works. I think there's lots of departments and lots of examples of great projects underway. The MOJ with some of their prisons as well through public sector decarbonisation scheme funding are looking at decarbonising some of those. I think they've all got their complexities and challenges, but I think there is a real focus across government, be it hospitals, schools, offices, for increasing the carbon efficiency of those buildings. There really are across government some really absolutely amazing examples of what's being done in this field. I'll be really interested to have a look and see who wins this particular section and probably go and ask for some advice for us.
You haven't got long to wait. 23rd of March is the day
Lovely.
of our awards evening. So we will definitely be wanting to bring some of those stories out and share them, because I think that's, again, something that often gets taken for granted. A lot of this work might be happening within an organisation, so giving people that opportunity to share, to explore what they've been doing, the impact they've been making is what we're really hoping for on this one. I'm conscious of our time, and I could probably happily chat with you all on this topic for hours and hours, but I really want to bring in some of those audience questions. So Kate, I was going to come to you to see what we got coming in from the audience that we can put to the panel.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got a couple here, but again, a reminder, please add your questions. So the first one is around incentives, and perhaps Miguel, I could come to you first on this one. And the question is around actually, incentives that have been happening, across the globe really have really helped sort of change people's behaviours. And Sarah uses the one here around having to pay for our plastic bags when we go to the supermarket or to other shops, and how that's really changed her behaviours. Are we doing anything similar? Are there any incentives that we're putting in place across the government estate, or any that you're aware of that we might want to discuss here?
So in terms of the dynamics of that shift in behavior, I think it starts at home. I think we are all used to having electricity meters now. We now all see the value of leaving the car at home and getting on the bus. there all of those little shifts, just turning down the washing machine by 10 degrees C has that impact on your bills, and you bring that into your work environment as well. You start thinking about the way that you travel to work, whether or not that you bring waste paper in, whether or not you print things, or whether you have them on your laptop and take them around and work in a more flexible environment. A lot of the incentives for sustainability are the betterment and the better working for us all and the better environment, and people can see the differences. Long gone are the days where you have drafty offices, non-spacious offices, areas which are not accessible for people with disabilities, areas that aren't green. The shift has been quite tectonic, but it's been so gentle that people wouldn't actually know unless you parachuted back 30 years ago, and you can see how we used to work to the way we are now. And I think the more that we start working that way, the more people will start demanding that of the environments that they work into, and everyone will start wanting to have offices which are just like that. And that will be a shift right across the whole of the UK economy, and we can see that happening now.
Brilliant, thank you. So very much sort of a much broader perhaps change approach, a change management, change in behaviours with all of these sort of small activities that you said underpinned by.
And there is such a thing as called the green premium. I mean, a greener building which meets even the basal level standards that we're looking for now, our red lines, has a premium on value of around 40%, is the increase in the asset price for an office which meets those standards versus those who are failing to meet the minimum standards at the moment. And that's because people just don't want to work in those old environments. We do want to work in this new way, and we want to be more efficient.
Fantastic, brilliant.
Kate, can I come in just a little bit there, if you don't mind? So Miguel's absolutely right. A lot of this comes down to individuals responding to incentives in various ways. Government is often seen as the leader in this because we set policy and requirements, and the private sector follows. And I think certainly in the commercial real estate world, many developers in particular have turned a little bit of a Nelson's blind eye to improving the sustainability of their buildings because they couldn't necessarily see the return on reducing the amount of embodied carbon in their buildings or making them more efficient and more sustainable. But as we certainly see now, an awful lot of sea change in the way that those organizations now look at developing workplaces, because they recognize that the people who wish to lease and then work in those spaces want to be able to prove to their staff and indeed as their green credentials themselves. So those organizations who are moving into that space are actually prepared to pay that little bit more to make sure that they have maintained and delivered against their own strategic objectives. So it is starting to have much more of an impact on the way that industry itself responds.
Brilliant. And just a follow-on question, I guess, Clive, based on one that the audience has asked. So Daniela is asking about how we then translate those change messages to messages that employees will take on board and that will be embedded into, I guess, all of our behaviours. So do we, as well as all the work that we've mentioned already today, do we have change management teams? Have we got internal communication plans? How do we, I guess, embed these messages in the way that all of civil servants and across government and the public sector, how people operate?
Yes, so I think just to focus on one area, and it was interesting that given the train strikes, Mel's managed to get in the office because she cycled in. So what an advert for green travel planning, Mel is. That's fantastic. And what we've been doing on the Government Hubs programme in many areas, as many of my colleagues have said, is actually look at the locations for those buildings are there to drive economic growth into the regions. And they do that by bringing civil servants into central city and town locations, rather than what was vogue in the 80s and 90s, was building these sort of anachronistic business parks out of town where everyone was driving, huge car parks, enormous seas of cars. So one of the big challenges on that program for everyone is to recognise that we are doing something which is taking cars off the road, giving people the opportunity of using public transport. But there are quite a few people who find that a little bit of a challenge. But in support of some of those change initiatives, Kate, we're now developing and working in a hybrid way, aren't we? So our designs suit a hybrid way of working, which doesn't mean people are expected to be in the workplace 5 days a week. So the burden of traveling there is less, but it's driving an economic growth in the local area by encouraging people to use green transport plans and public transport. And that's something that you definitely have to work on well in advance of relocating people out of remote, out of town business parks into a central location. So it's about making sure the message is understood, and getting that cohort of people supporting the idea of those green objectives.
Brilliant, thank you, Clive. Mel, did you want to come in and just add to that around recycling?
Yeah, because that's one of those areas of understanding and messaging potentially about why we need to do it. I know that quite often people are thinking, why do I need to segregate recycling quite so much? And what's the purpose of doing it? So with any sort of environmental initiative, I always kind of start with the why and the how. So why do I need to do it? And how do I do it? And the why for recycling is things like the more we segregate, the more we can reuse those items, including things like food waste, which is a real kind of area of focus at the moment. So that's the kind of why we're asking you to do this extra step, and the how, just making it as easy as possible. So making sure the signage is really clear, having kind of someone to contact if you're unsure what to do with something. So I kind of use that in lots of different ways for lots of initiatives. So making sure you've got the kind of why you need to do it and the how. I think it's fair to say when I started my career, sort of 15, 16 years ago, I spent a lot of time trying to convince people of the why. I feel a lot less of that now. People just need to know, is this the right thing to do? Great, all right, I'm on board. And then they need a really clear message about how to do it and how to do the right thing for sustainability.
Brilliant, thanks. And it's almost sort of really appealing, isn't it, to people's conscientiousness and you know, enabling people, I guess, to have a real personal investment in the reasons why, you know, we need to obviously be far more sustainable and the long-term impacts of it. Lou, I'm just going to come to you. May only have a chance for one more question, maybe two. You talked about historic buildings versus sort of newer buildings. How does your overall approach differ, or does it differ when you're approaching those two different types of buildings?
So they are two very different ends of the spectrum at times, but we do approach them in exactly the same way. So Miguel mentioned earlier, one of the key elements of the Net Zero programme is understanding the condition of those buildings. That absolutely has to be critical to all of our Net Zero interventions. We need to understand what's currently in the building, what is the condition of that asset, when's the right time to replace it, and what can we possibly do to lower carbon emissions at that building. We also we've got a programme of smart submetering installations underway at the moment, which again helps us to prove how efficient that building is at the moment and compare it to how it could be with the interventions we'd apply. Obviously, once we have that data, that's when it becomes a little bit of a different path, depending on whether we're talking about the historic estate or something more modern. And with the historic estate, we have the complexities and the fact there's little that we can do to fabric improvements within the buildings due to the historic nature of the building. However, what we are finding is that some of the interventions that we may have discounted a couple of years ago, we're actually now starting to get approval to do. So a good example would be photovoltaics, so solar panels on some of our historic building. We have just got listed building consent and planning for one of our central London properties. It's taken about 18 months, but we do have it. And that's a really, really good breakthrough for us in the GPA. We are looking at other alternatives. There's new technology all of the time that will assist with our historic estate. So it may be that we may apply slightly different interventions. So we're looking at solar slates as an alternative in the historic estate rather than a traditional PV panel. But it's doing as much as we can. So we do try and apply the same principles regardless of the building. But obviously with the historic estate, there is that added complexity. So therefore, usually time and cost with those particular buildings.
Brilliant, thanks. And Miguel, anything else you wanted to pick up on that one around challenges, perhaps?
Yeah, just quickly, the three key challenges that we know right across the UK for sustainability are skills, governance, and culture. Now, in terms of skills, we know that you cannot just go to the market and say we need X, Y, and Z, because the demand and the price tag on those skills is so high that you can't attract those people. But that said, we haven't stood still. We are now corporate members of the Institute of Environmental Measurement and Assessment, and we have training courses in-house that we're now delivering ourselves. We are members of the Better Buildings Partnership, the UK Green Buildings Industry, and LETI, and we are interacting all the time to learn from best practice right across the industry. In terms of governance, ExCo have been proactive on this, and they recognise that we need to embed sustainability into all of our governance. So sustainability now has a seat in the shape of Clive at ExCo, and Clive now chairs the sustainability subcommittee of ExCo. And we're moving our thinking away from immediate return on investment to whole life asset management. While these assets are in the stewardship of GPA, how can we get the best bang for our buck, and how can we reduce our utility costs and the like? And the last is the cultural shift. There is a real fear around sustainability that it will take forever and it will cost a fortune. And just by making people aware of all the subtle changes and the differences that we can make in our behaviors and the way that we use our assets, as well as the way we build our assets, we can have a tectonic shift in the efficiency and sustainability of our government estate.
Brilliant, thanks, Miguel. And that very hopefully, Lucy, sort of touches on as well your question there. Mel, was there just a couple of final thoughts that you wanted to add before we wrap up on that?
Yeah, on Lucy's question, I guess I mentioned about the why and the how, so thinking about why people want to do this and explaining how they do it. But also, if it's possible to get data for things like energy, that can be a real catalyst. I know in the past I've done competitions between different floors in a building and different teams, and it's amazing how a bit of competition drives a lot of change. So yeah, that kind of thinking, and perhaps will help it in part of your communications. Sounds good.
Great.
Can I just add, we achieved that in 1 Victoria Street in Bays by having dashboards of each directorate which demonstrated how the directorates were using their energy, and just by having that in the lobby areas, we started finding that directorates were competing with each other to reduce their energy usage.
Yeah, healthy competition is always good, isn't it? So I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up there. I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists for some brilliant insight, I guess, into your lives and into a really important topic. One final thing, I guess, to say is if you have found it helpful or if you have any comments at all, then Mark did pop at the beginning feedback form into the comments. As Anne said, this is the first of 10 of these sessions, so we would really value your input and feedback to see how we can improve these as they go along. But yeah, a huge thank you to everyone. Huge thank you for your questions. And I'll hand back to Anne for just some closing remarks.
Thank you, Kate. And echoing your thanks to Clive, Lou, Miguel and Mel for that really, really illuminating and really wide-ranging conversation. It took us in so many different directions, didn't it? I really hope that helped to inform you and inspire you, because that's what we're trying to do with Smarter Working Life, give you practical insights, but also some inspiration. If you're struggling at the moment to think, how do I get this on the board's agenda? How do I get my colleagues to be interested in this topic? That's the purpose of these. So don't forget, as Kate mentioned, we have a whole month of webinars coming up. They're absolutely jam-packed with lots of really fantastic topics. So head over to smarterworkinglive.com and you can see the full lineup and sign up for those. And don't forget about our conference day. Mark has popped something in the chat. We're trying something new this year with our conference day. We would like you to help us shape the agenda. So if there's a topic that you would like us to talk about, you can steer how that's going to go. So there's a Slido poll on the Slido tab that you can use to give your feedback about what you would like our thought leaders, our experts in Smarter Working to talk about. So we want to make this useful to you. So please do spend a couple of seconds, if you can, at the end of this, giving us some feedback on today and giving us your thoughts on what you would like to see at our Smarter Working Live conference day on the 1st of March. That would be really, really wonderful. So I hope I'll see you at some more of our events over the next month. And on behalf of the Government Property Agency and GovNews, I just want to thank you for joining us for this first event of Smarter Working Live 2023. What a wonderful way to start. I feel really energised. I feel full of positive thoughts about sustainability and its role that it can play in shaping our workplace experience. So thank you again to our panel. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.